She's still wasting her life on that ridiculous fantasy, my sister Vanessa announced to the entire room, gesturing toward me with her champagne glass. My brother-in-law Marcus chuckled without looking up from his phone. What do you expect? Some people never grow up. I glanced at my father, silently pleading for him to say something, anything in my defense. He just sighed and shook his head. She could have been something by now, he muttered. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your cheeks and never reaches your eyes. I'd learned long ago that showing pain only gave them more ammunition. But before I could change the subject, my 12-year-old son Elijah stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My mom's name is on the cover of Architectural Digest this month, he announced, his voice clear and unwavering. The room went completely still. Every face turned toward him in disbelief. And just like that, everything changed. Before we jump, back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 38, a single mother, and until recently, I had accepted my role as the family disappointment. 8 years ago, I walked away from a promising career in corporate architecture to pursue something that felt more meaningful, designing sustainable, affordable housing for communities in need. My family never forgave me for what they saw as throwing away a real career for charity work. The annual family gathering at my father's sprawling lakeside home in Vermont had always been an exercise in endurance. This year, I almost didn't come. The invitation wasn't particularly warm, just a group text with the date and time, followed by my father's typical attendance expected. I hesitated for days before accepting. Something in me still hoped that they might eventually see my work through eyes unclouded by their definition of success. Elijah was excited about the trip. Will Uncle Wei bring the jet ski again? He asked as we packed our bags. I nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm. And Grandpa promised to take us fishing on the new boat. My son had always been perceptive, sensitive to the undercurrents that flowed between the adults in my family, but he still loved his grandparents and cousins. I didn't want my complicated relationship with them to taint his. The 5-hour drive from our modest home in the outskirts of Boston to my father's estate gave me plenty of time to rehearse my responses to the inevitable questions and comments. How was work going? Fulfilling, thank you. Had I reconsidered? Marcus's offer to join his firm? I'm happy where I am. Was I dating anyone serious yet? I'm focused on Elijah and my career right now. What I wouldn't tell them was that my charitable hobby, as they called it, had evolved into Horizon Designs, a small but growing architectural firm specializing in sustainable community development. I wouldn't mention the international award we'd received last month for our work on a neighborhood revitalization project, and I certainly wouldn't bring up the feature in Architectural Digest that was due to hit newsstands next week, highlighting our innovative approach to affordable housing that didn't sacrifice beauty or sustainability. I'd stopped sharing my accomplishments with my family years ago. Their dismissive responses, "That's nice, but when will you do something serious?" had taught me to keep my professional life private. In their eyes, success had a very specific look: high-rise corporate, buildings, 6-figure salaries, and the prestige of a corner office in a downtown skyscraper. We arrived at my father's estate just as the afternoon sun was beginning to soften. The house stood as it always had, imposing and immaculate, overlooking Lake Champlain with the arrogance of old money. My father had built his fortune in commercial real estate development, turning a modest inheritance into an empire of shopping malls, office buildings, and luxury condominiums. His success cast a long shadow, one I had never quite managed to step out from under. Elijah whistled as we pulled into the circular driveway. "Grandpa's house is still the biggest I've ever seen," he said, his face pressed against the window. I smiled at his awe, remembering how I once felt the same way. "Remember," I said, reaching over to straighten his collar, "just be yourself. And if anyone says anything that makes you uncomfortable—" "I know, Mom," he interrupted, rolling his eyes with the confidence of pre-adolescence. "I'll find you or change the subject." I nodded, grateful for his resilience, wishing I could borrow some of it for myself. My sister Vanessa's Mercedes was already parked near the entrance, alongside my brother Kenneth's Range Rover. Both had followed in our father's footsteps, Vanessa as the marketing director for Chen Development, Kenneth as the heir apparent who would eventually take over the company. Both had married strategically, lived lavishly, and produced the requisite grandchildren who attended the right private schools and played the right sports. Both looked at my life choices with a mixture of pity and contempt. As we approached the massive oak doors, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed through the foyer beyond, triggering an involuntary tightening in my chest. It was a Pavlovian response built from years of subtle criticism and not-so-subtle disappointment. My father's housekeeper, Elena, opened the door with a warm smile that immediately eased some of my tension. Unlike my family, Elena had always treated me with genuine kindness. "Miss Maya and young Elijah, you've grown so tall." She embraced us both, then whispered, "They're all on the back terrace. Your father opened the good scotch already." Her raised eyebrow told me everything I needed to know about the mood I was walking into. The house was exactly as I remembered. It, museum-like in its perfection, with soaring ceilings, marble floors, and artwork selected more for investment value than aesthetic appeal. Elijah's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as we made our way through the grand hallway toward the terrace doors. I could hear laughter and the clink of glasses before I saw anyone. "There she is!" Kenneth's voice boomed as we stepped onto the terrace. He approached with the confident stride of someone who had never questioned his place in the world, clapping me on the shoulder with enough force to make me step back. "The prodigal daughter returns." "Hi, Ken," I said, accepting his too firm handshake. "Good to see you too." Vanessa approached more delicately, air-kissing near my cheek to avoid disturbing her immaculate makeup. "Maya, darling, that drive must have been dreadful in your little— What is it again?" "It's a Prius, Aunt Vanessa," Elijah answered before I could. "It gets great mileage." Vanessa's smile tightened. "How economical." She turned her attention to Elijah, her voice instantly warming. "And look at you, handsome boy. You're going to break some hearts soon." My father remained seated, in his favorite chair, a throne-like teak piece that commanded the best view of the lake. He didn't stand when I approached, just gestured vaguely with his tumbler of scotch. "You made it? Traffic?" "Not bad," I replied, leaning down to kiss his cheek. His skin was cool against my lips. "Thanks for having us." He nodded, then turned his attention to Elijah, his demeanor softening slightly. "There's my boy. Come here and tell your grandfather what grade you're in now." As Elijah happily launched into a detailed account of 7th grade and his recent science fair victory, I slipped away to greet the others, Marcus, Vanessa's husband, who barely looked up from his phone, Kenneth's wife, Stephanie, who was deep in conversation about private school admissions with another couple I recognized as family friends, and various cousins, aunts, and uncles who offered perfunctory hugs and immediately returned to their previous conversations. Stephanie's friend suddenly became very interested in her napkin. Marcus finally put his phone down. "Well," my father said finally, setting the phone on the table, "it seems we have some catching up to do." And just like that, the dynamic shifted. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough to feel the ground beneath my feet change from quicksand to something more solid. The remainder of dinner passed in a blur. Questions about my work, genuine questions, began to filter through the awkwardness. How had I secured the Oakland project? What were the challenges of sustainable design on a budget? How had Architectural Digest discovered my work? I answered each one honestly, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness that it had taken external validation for my family to show interest in my career. Throughout it all, Elijah remained by my side, occasionally jumping in with details. I hadn't realized he knew. Mom's office has 3 full-time architects now, he informed everyone proudly. And they're hiring 2 more because they got commissioned for a project in Colorado. As the dessert plates were being cleared, I excused myself, needing a moment alone to process what had just happened. I made my way through the house to the small library that had always been my refuge during family gatherings. The room smelled of leather-bound books and wood polish, comfortingly unchanged since my childhood. I sank into one of the wing chairs, by the window, gazing out at the moonlight reflecting off the lake. The door opened softly behind me, and I turned, expecting to see Elijah. Instead, my father stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. I nodded, straightening my posture automatically, an old habit from decades of trying to meet his expectations. He sat heavily, the leather creaking beneath him. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied my face as if seeing it for the first time in years. Perhaps he was. "Your son," he began, then paused to clear his throat. "Elijah is quite remarkable." "Yes," I agreed. "He is. He reminds me of you at that age. Before." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but we both knew what he meant. Before my mother died, before our family fractured along fault lines of grief and ambition, before I became the daughter who disappointed him. "He's braver than I was," I said softly. My father nodded slowly. "Maya, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words, a rare occurrence for a man who commanded boardrooms with ease. "I owe you an apology." The statement was so unexpected that I couldn't immediately respond. My father was not a man who apologized. He was a man who expected others to adapt to his vision of the world, not the other way around. "When you left Barton and Associates to start your own firm, I thought you were making a terrible mistake," he continued. "I thought you were throwing away a promising career out of some misguided idealism. I was afraid for you. And for Elijah." I swallowed hard. "I know." "But I was wrong," he said, the words seeming to cost him considerable effort. "I've been wrong for 8 years. The admission hung between us, fragile and unprecedented. "Why didn't you tell us about the magazine?" he asked after another long pause. I considered deflecting, giving him a polite answer that would preserve the tentative peace between us. But Elijah's courage had inspired me to speak my own truth. "Because I stopped expecting any of you to care," I replied honestly. "Every time I shared something I was proud of, it was dismissed as small time or impractical. After a while, it just became easier not to mention my work at all." My father winced slightly. "That's a fair assessment." I didn't want Elijah to grow up feeling like he had to defend his mother, or feeling like his family looked down on us. So I kept my professional life separate from these gatherings. I focused on making sure he had good relationships with all of you, even if mine were complicated. My father nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the bookshelves lined with leather-bound classics that no one in the family ever read. They were chosen for appearance, not content, much like many of the choices in the Chen household. "Your mother would have understood what you're doing," he said suddenly, surprising me again. "She always said architecture should serve people, not just impress them." The mention of my mother sent a jolt through me. My father rarely spoke of her, as if keeping her memory close was too painful to bear. That he would invoke her now, in this context, felt significant. "I remember," I said softly. Mom had been the one who first took me to architecture exhibits, who had encouraged my early sketches, who had taught me that buildings were not just structures, but spaces where life happened. She's part of why I chose this path. My father's eyes met mine, and I saw a flash of recognition, and maybe regret, pass through them. I should have seen that connection sooner. Before I could respond, the library door pushed open again, and Elijah appeared, a concerned expression on his face. "Mom, are you okay?" His eyes darted between me and my father, clearly ready to jump to my defense if needed. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured him. "Grandpa and I are just talking." "About your magazine cover," my father added, his voice warming as he addressed his grandson. "You were quite the advocate for your mother tonight." Elijah approached, cautiously, coming to stand beside my chair. "Someone had to tell the truth," he said simply, with the uncompromising moral clarity of a 12-year-old. My father actually smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his stern face. "Yes, I suppose someone did." He rose from his chair, straightening his jacket with a familiar gesture that signaled the conversation was coming to an end. "We should rejoin the others." "But Maya," he paused, placing a hand briefly on my shoulder. "I'd like to see your work sometime. The actual sites, not just pictures. If that would be acceptable to you." The offer hung in the air, an olive branch, extended across 8 years of misunderstanding. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. He nodded once and left the library, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Elijah immediately took the seat my father had vacated. "Did Grandpa apologize?" he asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. I laughed, softly. "Something like that." "Good," Elijah said firmly. "Because they were being really mean, Mom. And it's not fair. Your buildings help people. Uncle Kenneth just builds shopping malls." I reached out to brush a lock of hair from his forehead. "When did you become so grown up?" He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I just got tired of them acting like you're not awesome. You are awesome. And now they know it too." I felt a surge of love for this remarkable child who had somehow grown into a fiercely protective young man while I wasn't looking. "I'm sorry you felt you had to defend me." "I'm not," he replied instantly. "I've been waiting for the right moment. When Aunt Vanessa started in on you again, I knew it was time." "The right moment for what?" "To make them see you," he said simply. "Like, really see you." His words pierced straight to my heart. That was exactly what had been missing all these years, being truly seen by my family, not just judged against their expectations. We rejoined the gathering on the terrace, where the conversation had shifted to safer topics. I noticed subtle differences in how people interacted with me. Curious glances, more direct questions, fewer dismissive comments. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. Later that night, after Elijah had gone to bed in the same guest room I had used as a child, I found myself unable to sleep. I slipped out onto the small private balcony attached to my room, wrapped in a throw blanket against the cool night air. The lake stretched out before me, vast and peaceful under the stars. I thought about the journey that had led me here, not just to this uneasy family reconciliation, but to the career I had built despite constant discouragement. I remembered the day I had walked away from Barton and Associates, a prestigious firm where I had been steadily climbing the ranks. My supervisor had just assigned me to the design team for another luxury high-rise, and something in me had finally snapped. "I can't do this anymore," I had told him, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I didn't become an architect to design multi-million-dollar apartments that will sit empty as investment properties." He had looked at me like I had lost my mind. "This is architecture, Maya. This is how you build a career." "Not my career." I had replied and handed in my resignation that afternoon. I had been terrified. Elijah was only 4 years old. I was a single mother with a mortgage and student loans. But I had also been certain in a way I couldn't fully articulate, certain that there was a different path for me, one that honored my mother's belief that buildings should serve people, not just impress them. The first years of Horizon Designs had been lean and difficult. I worked from a converted garage, took on small residential projects to pay the bills, and spent my nights developing proposals for community-oriented work that better aligned with my vision. I faced rejection after rejection. Most developers weren't interested in affordable housing innovations. Most municipalities couldn't imagine prioritizing design quality in low-income projects. But slowly, project by project, I built a reputation. A small community center led to an affordable housing complex, which led to larger commissions. I hired my first employee, then my second. We won a small design award, then a larger one. And all the while, Elijah watched and absorbed everything: the struggles, the small victories, the late nights at the drafting table, the passion that drove me even when logic suggested I should give up. He had never seen me as a failure. Even when we had to cancel vacations because funds were tight, even when his cousins bragged about their luxurious homes and exotic trips, he had never once made me feel like I had chosen the wrong path. The balcony door slid open behind me, interrupting my thoughts. Vanessa stepped out, already dressed in silk pajamas and a matching robe. She hesitated when she saw me. "Sorry, I didn't realize you were out here," she said, actually sounding sincere. "I was just looking for a place to smoke without Dad knowing." She pulled a slim cigarette case from her pocket with a slightly guilty expression. "Your secrets safe with me," I assured her, making room on the small balcony. "I won't tell if you share." She looked surprised but offered me the case. I selected a cigarette, a rare indulgence I allowed myself only on these family visits, and she lit it for me before lighting her own. We stood in silence for a few moments, an unusual peace between us as we watched the smoke curl upward into the night sky. "So," Vanessa said finally, "Architectural Digest, huh?" I nodded, waiting for the dismissive follow-up that would minimize this achievement too. It didn't come. Instead, she said, "That's really impressive, Maya. I mean that." I glanced at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Her expression seemed genuine, without the competitive edge that usually characterized our interactions. "Thank you," I said simply. "I don't understand." "Why you never mentioned it," she continued, tapping ash over the railing. "That's a big deal. Even I know that, and I can barely tell the difference between craftsman and colonial styles." I sighed, considering how to explain years of protective silence. "Would you have believed me if I had?" She opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it again. "Probably not," she admitted after a pause. "Not without proof, which is pretty awful of me, isn't it?" The frank admission surprised me. Vanessa wasn't known for self-reflection. "We've all played our assigned roles for a long time," I said diplomatically. "Yeah, well, your role apparently wasn't accurate." She took another drag of her cigarette. "Elijah really blindsided us tonight." "He blindsided me too," I confessed. "I had no idea he was going to do that." Vanessa actually laughed. "That kid has guts. Reminds me of you before you got so quiet." The observation startled me. I had never thought Vanessa paid enough attention to notice the gradual withdrawal that had characterized my interactions with the family over the years. "I had to get quiet," I said finally. "It was easier than constantly defending choices none of you understood." Vanessa was silent for a long moment. "I should have asked," she said finally, "about your work. I should have actually listened when you talked about it. Instead of just assuming that I was failing, I finished for her." She had the grace to look embarrassed, Yeah, that. She stubbed out her cigarette in a small potted plant. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. The apology felt monumental, coming from my perpetually self-assured sister who I had never known, to admit fault. Thank you, I said again, not quite ready to say I forgive you, but acknowledging the effort. It means a lot. Vanessa nodded, then tilted her head as she looked at me more carefully. You're happy, aren't you? With your life? With your work? The question seemed so obvious, and yet no one in my family had ever asked it directly. Yes, I said without hesitation. I am. It's not always easy, but it's meaningful. I go to bed every night knowing my work matters to real people. She considered this, a slight furrow between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. I'm not sure I can say the same, she admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability. Don't get me wrong, I love the benefits of my job, the status, the security, but the actual work? She shrugged. It's just work. I didn't know how to respond to this unexpected glimpse beneath my sister's polished exterior. Before I could formulate a reply, she straightened her shoulders, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had appeared. Anyway, I should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. Dad's planning that boat trip. She paused at the door. You know, I'd like to see some of your projects too sometime, not just in photos. I'd like that, I said, meaning it just as I had when my father had made the same request. She nodded and disappeared back into the house, leaving me alone with the night sky and a glimmer of hope that perhaps, finally, my family might be ready to see me as I truly was. Not as the daughter who had failed to meet their expectations, but as a woman who had succeeded on her own terms. The morning air was crisp with early autumn, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water as I stepped onto the dock where my father's boat waited. Last night's conversations had altered something fundamental in the family dynamic, but I still felt cautious, unsure if the changes would hold in the clear light of day or dissolve like morning mist over the lake. Elijah had already bounded ahead, his enthusiasm for the promised boat trip overwhelming any residual tension from dinner. He stood at the end of the dock with my father, listening intently as the older man pointed out features of the sleek vessel that bobbed gently in the water. A 38-foot masterpiece of mahogany and chrome that my father had named Legacy. Kenneth appeared beside me, coffee mug in hand, designer sunglasses hiding his eyes. Dad's showing him the navigation system, he observed. He seems quite taken with your boy. Elijah has that effect on people, I replied, watching my son nod seriously at whatever my father was explaining. He gets that from you, Kenneth said, surprising me. When I glanced at him questioningly, he shrugged. You always had a way of making people feel heard. Before you stopped talking to us, that is. I wasn't sure if it was an accusation or an observation. I didn't stop talking, Ken. I just got tired of not being listened to. He sipped his coffee, considering this. Fair enough. Though in our defense, you kept your success pretty well hidden. It wasn't hidden, I corrected him. It just wasn't displayed in ways you recognized as success. Not everything valuable comes with a hefty price tag or a corner office. Kenneth winced slightly, but nodded. I'm beginning to see that. He hesitated, then added, That Oakland project, the one in the magazine, it's genuinely impressive, Maya. Even Dad thinks. So, and you know how hard he is to impress. The acknowledgement felt strange after so many years of dismissal. Thanks, I said simply. How did you manage to keep costs so low while still making the buildings look, well, not like affordable housing usually looks? His question seemed genuinely curious without the condescending tone I had grown accustomed to. By rethinking the entire approach, I explained, warming to the subject despite my lingering wariness. Instead of starting with luxury designs and then stripping them down to meet budget constraints, we designed specifically for efficiency from the beginning. modular components, locally sourced materials, passive solar positioning. Passive solar? He interrupted, orienting the buildings to maximize natural light and heat, minimizing energy costs long term. It's simple physics, really, but it's often overlooked in conventional development because it requires more thoughtful initial planning. Kenneth nodded slowly. Interesting. And the community spaces? Those garden areas looked extensive. They're an integral part of the design, not an afterthought, I said, surprised by his continued interest. Shared spaces create community ownership and pride. When people have beautiful common areas to gather, they're more likely to maintain them, to know their neighbors, to look out for each other. That's actually brilliant, Kenneth admitted. Economically efficient and socially beneficial. That's the whole point of what I do, I said. It's not charity work or idealism. For its own sake, it's practical, sustainable architecture that serves real human needs. Our conversation was interrupted by Vanessa's arrival at the dock, her twins trailing behind her in matching nautical outfits that looked like they'd never been worn before. Marcus followed with a large cooler, looking slightly less absorbed in his phone than usual. Are we actually going sailing, or is this just a standing around talking about boats expedition? Vanessa called out, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. My father gestured for everyone to board. All aboard, who's going? Aboard, he announced, helping Elijah step carefully from the dock into the boat. I noticed how his hand lingered protectively on my son's shoulder. A grandfatherly gesture that seemed more natural than I could remember seeing from him in years. The morning unfolded with surprising ease. My father navigated us to a secluded cove where the water was calm enough for swimming. The children dove off the side of the boat with varying degrees of grace and courage, Elijah leading the charge with a spectacular cannonball that soaked the adults who hadn't retreated to a safe distance. I sat on the cushioned bench at the stern, watching my son in his element, fearless, joyful, completely present in the moment. Beside me, my father observed the scene with uncharacteristic quietness. He's a remarkable boy, he said finally, echoing his words from the previous night. You've done well with him, Maya. Very well indeed. The compliment, so straightforward and without qualification, caught me off guard. Thank you, I managed. His father. My father began, then paused, clearly uncertain if he should continue on this sensitive topic. James had left when Elijah was barely 2, deciding that family life wasn't compatible with his ambitions to become a renowned installation artist. He sent birthday cards, made occasional visits, but had never been a consistent presence in Elijah's life. James is in Berlin, I supplied. Some major gallery showing. He calls every few weeks. My father nodded, his expression unreadable. He had never approved of James, had predicted the relationship's failure from the start. But he had the grace not to say, "I told you so," when it fell apart, which was perhaps the most supportive thing he could have done at the time. Elijah doesn't seem to have suffered from his absence, my father observed. Children are resilient when they're secure in the love they do have, I said. I've made sure he knows he's enough, exactly as he is, that his worth isn't tied to achievements or expectations. My father was quiet for a long moment. Unlike how you were raised, he said finally, the statement hanging between us like a recognized truth neither of us had previously acknowledged, aloud. Yes, I agreed simply. Unlike that. He nodded, seeming to absorb this. Your mother would have done better. She understood those things in a way I never did. He looked out over the water, his profile sharp against the blue sky. After she died, I hardened. I thought success and achievement were the only things I could give you children that would last, that would protect you from life's uncertainties. It was the most he had ever said about how my mother's death had affected his parenting choices. I felt a sudden compassion for him, this powerful, difficult man who had shaped so much of my Life with his expectations and judgments. You did what you thought was best, I offered. I was wrong, he said bluntly. At least partly. Looking at Elijah, how confident he is, how straightforward. It's clear your approach has merits mine. Didn't. Before I could respond to this unprecedented admission, Elijah pulled himself up onto the boat, water streaming from his hair and swim trunks, his smile bright enough to rival the sun overhead. Mom! Grandpa! Did you see my dive? Uncle Kenneth said it was Olympic quality. He made exaggerated air quotes around the phrase, clearly pleased with the praise. It was spectacular, I confirmed, handing him a towel. But maybe give us a warning next time before you soak everyone within 15 feet. He grinned unrepentantly and plopped down between us, his wet presence somehow bridging the formal distance that had always characterized my relationship with my father. We sat there for a moment, 3 generations in a line, watching Vanessa's twins attempting to match Elijah's diving prowess, while Kenneth offered exaggerated scores for each attempt. I have a project I'd like your opinion on, my father said, suddenly addressing me over Elijah's head. A parcel of land outside the city. It's been sitting undeveloped for years because the terrain is challenging, but I'm thinking it might be suitable for a residential community. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the professional overture. What kind of residential community? That's what I'd like your input on, he replied. The conventional approach would be luxury homes, but after seeing what you've accomplished, with the Oakland project, I'm wondering if there might be alternatives worth considering. The implication was clear. He was not just acknowledging my work, but actively seeking my professional expertise. It was a form of respect I had long since stopped expecting from him. I'd be happy to take a look, I said carefully, not wanting to overreact to what might be a momentary impulse on his part rather than a genuine change of heart. Elijah looked between us, clearly following the conversation with interest. Mom? Could make it amazing, he declared with unwavering confidence. Her team can design anything. My father's mouth quirked in what might have been a suppressed smile. I'm beginning to believe that might be true. He stood, stretching his back. I need to check on our heading. We should start making our way back soon if we want to be home for lunch. He walked toward the helm, leaving Elijah and me alone on the bench. See? Elijah said quietly, nudging me with his damp shoulder. I told you they just needed to know how awesome you are. I wrapped an arm around him, ignoring the wet patches he was leaving on my shirt. You're pretty awesome yourself, you. Know that? He shrugged, but I could see he was pleased. I just told the truth. The truth with perfect timing and maximum dramatic effect, I corrected him with a smile. I might have practiced a little, he admitted. In the mirror. I wanted to get it right. The admission made my heart swell. My son had not only seen my struggles but had planned, deliberately and carefully, to address them in the most effective way possible. He had shown a level of emotional intelligence and courage that many adults never achieve. You got it exactly right, I assured him. But you didn't need to fight that battle for me. I would have been okay either way. He looked at me seriously, his young face suddenly solemn. But why should you have to be just okay when you could be appreciated? You always tell me to stand up for what's right. This was right. I couldn't argue with his logic or his heart. Instead, I hugged him closer, grateful beyond words for this extraordinary child who had somehow become my greatest advocate. The boat ride back to the dock was relaxed, with conversation flowing more naturally than it had in years. Kenneth asked thoughtful questions about my current projects. Vanessa mentioned an article she'd read about sustainable urban planning that had made her think of my work. Even Marcus put his phone away long enough to discuss the economic implications of community-focused development. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of old patterns emerging, my father's instinctive criticism of an approach I described, Vanessa's reflexive comparison of my work to real commercial projects. But these moments were briefer, softer, and often followed by what appeared to be conscious course corrections. As we disembarked at the dock, I found myself walking alongside my father back toward the house. The others had gone ahead, with Elijah eagerly telling his cousins about a fish he'd spotted in the cove. "I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow." "Morning," my father said abruptly. "To discuss that property I mentioned. Bring your portfolio if you have it with you." "I always have digital copies," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the surprise I felt at his continued interest. He nodded brusquely. 9 o'clock then. I've invited some associates who might be interested in your approach." He quickened his pace before I could respond, catching up with Kenneth to discuss something about the boat's engine performance. I stood for a moment on the path, processing what had just happened. My father wasn't just acknowledging my work. He was actively creating an opportunity for me to showcase it to his professional network. It was the kind of supportive gesture I had long since stopped hoping for. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the estate's garden, sitting on a stone bench surrounded by late-blooming flowers my mother had planted decades ago. I was reviewing projects on my tablet, preparing for the unexpected meeting my father had arranged for the following morning, when I sensed someone approaching. Looking up, I was surprised to see Stephanie, Kenneth's wife, hovering uncertainly nearby. Of all my family members, Stephanie was perhaps the one I knew least well. She had always seemed to exist in Vanessa's shadow, rarely expressing opinions of her own, carefully maintaining her role as a supportive spouse and mother. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said hesitantly. "You look busy." "Just preparing for a meeting," I replied, setting the tablet aside. "Did you need something?" She sat beside me on the bench, smoothing her linen skirt with nervous hands. "I wanted to talk to you about your work. It's actually why I wanted to come this weekend." This was unexpected. "My work? I didn't think you were interested in architecture." "Not architecture specifically," she admitted, "but what you're doing with it, the community focus." She took a deep breath. "I've been looking for a way to use my background in education more meaningfully. I've been volunteering at an after-school program in a neighborhood a lot like your Oakland project, and the facilities are challenging, to put it mildly." I listened, increasingly curious about this side of Stephanie I'd never seen before. "I've been trying to secure funding for improvements, but it's been difficult to get potential donors to visualize what's possible in such a rundown space," she continued. "When I saw those images on Elijah's phone last night, how you transformed ordinary buildings into something beautiful and functional, I wondered if maybe we could collaborate." I finished for her. She nodded, looking relieved that I had made the connection. "Yes, exactly. I have the educational programming expertise, but I need someone who understands how physical spaces can support learning objectives. Someone who can create beautiful, functional environments without extravagant budgets." I found myself genuinely intrigued by the possibility. "What sort of facility are we talking about?" Stephanie's face lit up, and she pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly to find photos. "It's an old community center that was converted into a learning space, but nothing was really designed for children." She showed me images of a dreary building with institutional green walls, fluorescent lighting, and mismatched furniture. "These kids deserve better than this. They're doing amazing work academically, but their environment doesn't support or inspire them at all." I examined the photos, my architect's mind already seeing possibilities for transformation. Natural, light, flexible learning spaces, colors that stimulate without overwhelming. "Yes," Stephanie exclaimed, her usual reserve completely gone. "And storage solutions that actually work for children's access levels, and outdoor spaces that can become part of the learning environment." "It's an interesting project," I said honestly. "I'd need to visit the site, talk to the staff and children, understand how they currently use the space and what their ideal would be." "Of course," she agreed quickly. "I could arrange that whenever you're available." The program director would be thrilled. I studied her face, seeing genuine passion there that I had never witnessed in our previous interactions. Can I ask you something, Stephanie? Why haven't you ever mentioned this work before? She glanced down, a flush rising to her cheeks. It didn't seem important enough. Not compared to what everyone else in this family does. Kenneth's development projects, Vanessa's marketing campaigns, your father's empire. Volunteering at an after-school program felt small by comparison. The admission struck a chord of recognition in me. How many times had I felt the same way about my own work before I had found the confidence to pursue it on my own terms? It's not small, I told her firmly. Helping children thrive is never small work. It might be the most important work there. Tears welled unexpectedly in her eyes. That's what I believe too. I've never said it out loud to anyone in this family. I reached out and squeezed her hand, feeling a new connection forming with this woman I had always seen as merely an extension of my brother. Well, I'm glad you're saying it now. And I'd be happy to visit your program and see how I might be able to help. She wiped her eyes quickly, composing herself with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to maintaining appearances. Thank you, Maya. Truly. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of wonder at how quickly relationships could shift when people were finally seen for who they truly were, not just for the roles they had been assigned within a family narrative. Dinner that evening was an entirely different experience from the previous night. There was a lightness to the conversation, an absence of the cutting remarks and competitive undercurrents that had characterized Chen family gatherings for as long as I could remember. My father announced his morning meeting with me to the table, describing the property and his interest in exploring innovative approaches to community development. The phrase itself represented a significant shift from his usual emphasis on luxury and exclusivity. Maya's firm has demonstrated that quality design and affordability aren't mutually exclusive, he said, causing me to nearly choke on my wine at hearing such words from him. I think there may be applications of her methodology that could open new markets for us. Kenneth nodded thoughtfully. I've been looking into sustainable building practices myself recently. The tax incentives are becoming quite substantial, not to mention the marketing advantages. It's not just about incentives, I found myself saying. It's about creating spaces that genuinely improve people's lives. That should be the primary goal, with financial benefits as a welcome side effect, not the other way around. I braced myself for dismissal, for being labeled naive or impractical. Instead, my father surprised me once again. She's right, he said, setting down his fork deliberately. I've been thinking about this a great deal since last night. Our company has always measured success in profit margins and property values. But perhaps there are other metrics worth considering. The table fell silent, everyone clearly as shocked as I was by this pronouncement from a man whose business philosophy had always been unapologetically profit-focused. What kinds of metrics? Vanessa asked, sounding genuinely curious. My father looked at me. Maya? You're the expert here? The acknowledgement sent a rush of emotion through me that I carefully contained. This was my chance to articulate the principles that had guided my work for years, to an audience that might finally be ready to hear them. Longevity, I began. How well buildings serve their purpose over time. Adaptability, can spaces be repurposed as needs change? Environmental impact, both during construction and throughout a building's lifetime. Community integration, how a development enhances rather than disrupts existing neighborhoods. And most importantly, human well-being. Do people thrive in the spaces we create? I expected someone to interrupt, to dismiss these soft metrics, in favor of hard numbers and bottom lines. But everyone was listening, even Marcus, who had put his phone face down on the table. The irony, I continued, gaining confidence, is that when you prioritize these factors, the financial success often follows naturally. Buildings that people love are buildings they fight to preserve. Developments that enhance communities increase in value rather than deteriorate. Sustainability saves enormous costs over time. My father nodded slowly. Your grandfather understood this, he said, referencing his own father who had started the family business from nothing. He built homes people could afford, but he built them well. Somewhere along the way, as the company grew, we lost sight of that foundation. It was an extraordinary admission from a man who had always seemed to consider his business approach beyond criticism. I felt a shift in the atmosphere around the table, not just in how they saw me, but in how my family was beginning to re-examine their own priorities. Elijah, who had been quietly eating his dessert during this conversation, suddenly spoke up. Mom always says that a good building tells a story about what we value most. All eyes turned to him, and then to me. In that moment, I realized what my son had accomplished with his brave stand the previous night. He hadn't just forced my family to acknowledge my professional success. He had created an opening for a more fundamental reassessment of what success itself might mean. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of my father's home office, illuminating decades of achievement displayed on the walls. Architectural renderings of his most profitable developments, photographs of ribbon cuttings and groundbreaking ceremonies, framed newspaper articles chronicling the growth of Chen development from a modest local business to a regional powerhouse. Every item had been carefully selected to tell a story of commercial success and financial acumen. I sat in one of the leather chairs facing his imposing desk, digital portfolio ready on my tablet, an unexpected nervousness fluttering in my stomach. Despite the previous day's breakthroughs, I couldn't quite shake the feeling of being called to the principal's office, a holdover from a lifetime of seeking this man's approval and often falling short. When the door opened, I was surprised to see not just my father entering, but Kenneth and 3 people I didn't recognize. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the crisp business attire that signaled serious money and influence in the development world. Maya, my father said, unusually warm as he gestured to the newcomers, I'd like you to meet Richard Donovan of Westlake Investments, Sophia Patel from Green Century Development, and Michael Torres from the Urban Renewal Commission. They're interested in hearing about your approach to community-centered design. I stood, extending my hand to each in turn, trying to hide my surprise. These weren't just random business associates. These were significant players in the development field, including the director of an influential public commission that approved major urban projects. This wasn't a casual meeting. It was a carefully orchestrated opportunity. Thank you for making time for this, I said, falling back on professional courtesy to mask my confusion. I wasn't expecting such a distinguished audience. Your father has been rather insistent that we needed to meet you, Sophia Patel said with a smile. He sent us all links to your Architectural Digest feature at 6 this morning. I haven't seen Charles this enthusiastic about a design concept in years. I glanced at my father, who actually looked slightly embarrassed, an expression I had rarely seen on his usually impassive face. The work speaks for itself, he said gruffly. Indeed it does, Richard Donovan agreed, settling into one of the chairs. Particularly the economics of it. Your cost per square foot numbers for the Oakland project are remarkably low for the quality achieved. We'd like to understand how you manage that. For the next hour, I presented my work in detail, not just the Oakland development that had caught their attention, but the evolution of Horizon Design's approach over the years. I explained our integrated design process that involved community stakeholders from the beginning, our materials research that identified cost-effective alternatives to traditional building components, and our emphasis on long-term operational efficiency rather than just construction costs. The questions they asked were thoughtful and specific. They challenged assumptions, requested clarification on technical details, and explored potential applications beyond affordable housing. It was the kind of serious professional engagement I had always hoped for from my family but had never received. Throughout the presentation, I noticed Kenneth taking detailed notes, his expression thoughtful. My father remained mostly silent, but his attentiveness was palpable. He wasn't just hosting this meeting. He was studying the interaction, assessing the response to my ideas with the keen analytical skill he brought to all business ventures. What I find most compelling, Sophia said as I concluded, is how you've reimagined the relationship between development and community. Instead of imposing a design on a neighborhood, you're cultivating a collaborative process that ultimately yields better results for everyone involved: residents, investors, and the broader community. That's precisely our goal, I agreed. The traditional development model often creates adversarial relationships with existing communities, but when people feel genuine ownership of the process, when they see their input respected and incorporated, they become advocates rather than opponents. Michael Torres nodded emphatically. The Commission has been pushing for more community engagement in urban projects for years, but developers usually treat it as a box to check, not a fundamental design principle. Your approach is what we've been trying to encourage. My father cleared his throat. Which brings us to the reason I asked you all here today. He pressed a button on his desk, and a large screen on the wall illuminated with images of a neglected urban area: abandoned industrial buildings, overgrown lots, crumbling infrastructure. The River Point District, 38 acres at the edge of the city. It's been stuck in development hell for 15 years. I recognized the area immediately. It had been the subject of numerous failed revitalization attempts, each collapsing under the weight of community opposition, financing challenges, or political complications. The city is preparing to issue a new RFP for comprehensive redevelopment, my father continued. Previous approaches have focused on luxury condominiums and upscale retail, with predictable results: gentrification concerns, community resistance, and ultimately, project failure. Richard Donovan frowned. Charles, we've looked at River Point before. The economics are challenging, to say the least. They are if we continue applying the same models that have failed repeatedly, my father agreed. But what if we tried something different? He turned to me. Maya, could your approach work at this scale? Not just a single housing development, but an entire district? The question took my breath away. River Point represented a project at least 10 times larger than anything Horizon Designs had ever undertaken. It was the kind of opportunity that could define a firm's reputation for decades. And my father was suggesting, in front of influential potential partners, that I might be the right person to lead it. The principles would be the same, I said. Carefully, not wanting to overpromise. But the complexity would increase exponentially. It would require significant resources, a larger team, and genuine commitment from all stakeholders to a different kind of development process. Resources can be arranged, Kenneth interjected, especially with the right partners. He glanced meaningfully at Richard and Sophia. And if the Commission saw a truly innovative approach to River Point, one that addressed the concerns that have derailed previous proposals, we could potentially fast-track approvals, Michael added. My mind was racing, already envisioning possibilities for the neglected district. Mixed-income housing interspersed with green spaces, adaptive reuse of the historic industrial buildings, community facilities that could serve as anchors for neighborhood revitalization. It was the kind of comprehensive project I had dreamed of tackling, but had never had the resources or connections to pursue. It would need to be a partnership, I said, looking directly at my father. Horizon Designs couldn't take this on alone, but with the right collaboration. I left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. My father nodded slowly. That's precisely what I was thinking. Chen Development has the financial resources and political relationships. Your firm has the design approach and community credibility. Together, We might be able to succeed where others have failed. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing potential structures for such a partnership, preliminary ideas for the district, and next steps for exploring the opportunity further. By the time everyone stood to leave, there was a tangible energy in the room, the excitement of a challenging but potentially transformative project taking shape. As the visitors filed out, promising follow-up discussions and sharing information, my father asked me to stay behind. Kenneth remained as well, sitting in one of the vacated chairs with an expression I couldn't quite read. When the door closed, leaving just the three of us, my father looked at me with an intensity that made me straighten instinctively. "You impressed them," he said simply. "They're easy to impress with something new," I replied, not wanting to read too much into their enthusiasm. The real test would be their commitment when challenges arise. Kenneth chuckled. Always the pragmatist. But Dad's right. They were impressed. Particularly Torres from the commission. Having him on board early could be invaluable. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Maya, I want to be clear about what I'm proposing. This wouldn't be Chen Development hiring Horizon Designs as a contractor. I'm suggesting a true partnership. Shared risk, shared decision-making, shared reward." I blinked in surprise. Partnership? Between your company and mine? Yes. With you leading the design and community engagement aspects, and us handling finance and development logistics. He paused, then added, "It would mean working closely together. Something we haven't done before." The implication hung in the air between us. Not just a business collaboration, but a rebuilding of our personal relationship as well. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What about you, Ken?" I asked, turning to my brother. "How do you feel about this?" Kenneth looked thoughtful. "Honestly, I think it makes sense. Not just because of your design approach, though that's obviously compelling, but because you understand something the rest of us have missed. That successful development isn't just about buildings, it's about people." Coming from Kenneth, who had always been my father's most dedicated disciple in prioritizing profit, above all else, this statement was nothing short of revolutionary. "This is a significant opportunity," my father said, "for all of us. For you to scale your vision, for Chen Development to evolve its approach, for Riverpoint to finally realize its potential. I understand if you need time to consider." "I don't," I interrupted, surprising myself with my certainty. "I want to do this, but I need to be sure you understand what you're signing up for. My approach isn't something we can apply superficially. It requires genuine commitment to community involvement, to sustainability, to designing for people's needs rather than just their buying power." My father nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'm prepared to learn." He hesitated, then added, "From you." Those two simple words, "from you," carried the weight of years of dismissal and underestimation finally being set aside. My father, the consummate authority figure who had always positioned himself as the one with wisdom to impart, was acknowledging that I had something valuable to teach him. "Then yes," I said, extending my hand across the desk. "Partners." He took my hand, his grip firm but not dominating as it had always been in the past. Kenneth reached over to place his hand atop ours, a gesture of solidarity that felt both ceremonial and genuine. "The Chen family, working together at last," he said with a smile. "Mom would be proud." At the mention of our mother, my father's expression softened in a way I rarely saw. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "She would." When I left the office to find Elijah, my mind was spinning with the implications of what had just occurred. Not only had my father arranged a meeting that could potentially transform my career, but he had proposed a partnership that acknowledged the value of my approach and expertise. After years of feeling like the family disappointment, I had been offered a seat at the table. Not as a favor, but as a valued contributor with something essential to offer. I found Elijah by the lake, skipping stones with remarkable skill, each throw sending the flat rock bouncing multiple times across the calm water surface. He looked up as I approached, his expression immediately alert to my mood. "How was the meeting?" he asked, scanning my face for clues. "It was." I searched for words that could adequately describe the monumental shift that had occurred. "Transformative," I settled on finally. His eyebrows shot up. "That good?" I nodded, sitting on a nearby rock and motioning for him to join me. As he settled beside me, I explained what had happened. The important visitors, my father's proposal, the potential River Point project. "So you and Grandpa are going to be business partners?" he asked, comprehending the significance immediately. "It looks that way," I confirmed, along with Uncle Kenneth. Elijah broke into a wide grin. "That's awesome. I knew they'd finally see how amazing you are." I put my arm around his shoulders, hugging him close. "They saw because you made them look," I said softly. "You changed everything, Elijah, with that one moment of courage at dinner." He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I just told the truth." "The truth with perfect timing," I corrected him, "and incredible bravery. Do you know how rare it is for someone your age to stand up to a room full of adults like that?" He picked up another stone, turning it over in his hands. "I wasn't scared," he said after a moment. "I was just mad. They were being so unfair to you. It wasn't right." "No, it wasn't," I agreed. "But you know what's more important than what they thought of me?" "What you thought? The fact that you saw me, really saw me, even when they didn't. That meant everything." He leaned against me, his shoulder warm against mine. "I always see you, Mom," he said simply. The words pierced straight to my heart. In that moment, I realized that while I had been worrying about my family's lack of recognition, my son had been giving me something far more valuable all along: his unwavering belief in me, his clear-eyed understanding of what I was trying to accomplish, his pride in my work not because of external validation, but because he genuinely understood its worth. "I know you do," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "And that matters more than anything else." "So what happens now?" he asked, practical as always. I looked out over the lake, considering the question. "Now we explore this partnership, see if it can really work. It won't be easy. Grandpa and I have very different approaches, and changing the way Chen development operates won't happen overnight. But the potential to create something truly meaningful at River Point is worth the effort." Elijah nodded seriously. "You'll make it." "Work, you always do." His simple confidence was like a balm for years of self-doubt. If my son believed in me so completely, how could I not believe in myself? We spent the rest of the afternoon by the lake, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying a rare moment of peace before the complexity of our new reality set in. The family dinner that evening had a different energy, purposeful rather than merely social, with conversation revolving around preliminary ideas for River Point and the potential restructuring of Chen development to accommodate this new direction. Even Vanessa seemed genuinely engaged, suggesting marketing approaches that would highlight the community benefits of the project rather than just its investment potential. "The narrative is everything with a project like this," she explained. "We need to tell a story that resonates with both potential residents and investors, a story about rejuvenation, community, and sustainable growth." "Exactly," I agreed, surprised by her insight. The traditional developer versus community dynamic needs to be replaced with a collaborative vision. "I may know some people at the Environmental Protection Agency who could be helpful with the brownfield remediation aspects," Marcus offered, actually looking directly at me rather than at his phone for once. "There are substantial federal grants available for environmentally conscious redevelopment." Throughout the discussion, I noticed my father watching me, not with the critical assessment I was accustomed to, but with something that looked remarkably like pride. When I caught his eye, he nodded slightly, an acknowledgement that went beyond words. Later that night, as I packed our bags for the drive home the next morning, Elijah sat cross-legged on the guest room bed, organizing his collection of rocks and pine cones gathered from around the estate. "Do you think we'll come back here more often now?" he asked, carefully wrapping a particularly interesting stone in tissue paper. "Probably," I admitted. "The partnership with Grandpa and Uncle Kenneth will mean more family interaction." He considered this, his expression thoughtful. "That's good, I think. Even though they weren't always nice to you before, they're trying now. People should get second chances when they're really trying." The simple wisdom in his statement struck me deeply. My son, at 12 years old, understood something about forgiveness and growth that many adults never grasp. That genuine effort to change deserves recognition, even after hurt has been caused. "When did you get so wise?" I asked him, only half joking. He shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I had a good teacher." The next morning, as we prepared to leave, my family gathered in the driveway to say goodbye. Something that had never happened during previous visits. Usually, departures were casual, almost afterthoughts, with people waving vaguely from whatever activity they were engaged in as we drove away. This time, everyone was present. Kenneth handed me a folder containing preliminary information about River Point, making plans for a site visit the following week. Vanessa actually hugged me, a real embrace, not the air kiss she typically offered, and whispered, "I'm sorry it took us so long to see you." Even Marcus shook my hand firmly, making direct eye contact as he said, "Looking forward to working together on this project." Stephanie approached last, pressing a business card into my hand. "For the school program we discussed," she said quietly. "Whenever you have time. No pressure." My father stood slightly apart from the others, his posture as straight and formal as ever. But when I approached him, he surprised me by taking both my hands in his. "Thank you for giving us another chance," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "For giving me another chance." "We're family," I replied simply. "That doesn't change, even when we disagree." He nodded, then leaned down to speak directly to Elijah. "Take care of your mother," he said seriously. "She's doing important work that matters." Elijah straightened, matching my father's formality. "I know," he replied. "I always have." The drive home felt different from the tense journey to Vermont just days earlier. We sang along to Elijah's playlist, stopped for ice cream at a roadside stand, and talked openly about the possibilities that lay ahead, not just for my career, but for our family relationships as well. "Do you think they really understand now?" Elijah asked as we neared Boston, the familiar skyline appearing on the horizon. "About your work? About why it matters?" I considered the question carefully. "I think they're beginning to," I said honestly. Understanding doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes it builds slowly, through new experiences and open conversations. But they're trying, and that's significant. Elijah nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "I'm glad I said something," he declared, "even if it was scary at first." "I'm glad too," I told him, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "You taught me something important this weekend." "What's that?" "That sometimes the truth needs to be spoken aloud, even when it's uncomfortable. That standing up for yourself, or for someone you love, takes courage, but it's worth it. And that real change can happen when we stop accepting the roles others have assigned to us and insist on being seen for who we truly are." He smiled, visibly pleased with this framing of his actions. "So basically, I was right, and the grown-ups were wrong." I laughed, grateful for his ability to distill complex emotional dynamics into straightforward terms. Yes, essentially, but don't let it go to your head. As we pulled into our driveway, our modest but much-loved home looking somehow more welcoming, after the grandeur of my father's estate, I felt a sense of completion. Not of an ending, but of a circle being drawn, connecting my past with my present and opening possibilities for a future I hadn't dared to imagine before. My phone pinged with a notification. It was an email from Sophia Patel, already following up on our meeting with potential funding sources for Riverpoint. Attached was a note that simply read, "Your father speaks very highly of you. I can see why." 6 words that would have seemed impossible just days ago. Elijah grabbed his backpack and bounded up the front steps, eager to check on his science project and call his best friend to recount the weekend's events. I followed more slowly, taking a moment to appreciate the simple beauty of our home. Not as grand as my father's estate, but filled with warmth and authenticity that no amount of luxury could provide. Inside, I walked straight to my home office, where a framed copy of my first major design award hung on the wall. I had always kept it here, in this private space, rather than displaying it prominently where visitors might see it. It had felt somehow safer to keep my professional pride contained, separate from the personal disappointment of my family's disinterest. Now, I carefully removed the frame from the wall and carried it to the living room, placing it on the mantel, where it would be visible to anyone who entered our home. It was a small gesture, but significant, an acknowledgement that I no longer needed to compartmentalize my achievements or minimize my success to make others comfortable. My career wasn't a failed detour or a misguided rebellion against family expectations. It was a deliberate choice, a path with purpose and meaning, worthy of recognition not because a magazine had featured it, or because my father had finally acknowledged its value, but because it reflected my deepest values and contributed something meaningful to the world. Elijah appeared in the doorway, observing me with a knowing smile. "It looks good there," he said, nodding toward the award. "You should put up the magazine cover too when it comes out." "Maybe I will," I agreed, surprising myself with how right the idea felt. "Mom," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "I'm really proud of you. Not because Grandpa and everyone finally sees how good you are. I was always proud of you, because you build things that help people, even when it was hard." I crossed the room and wrapped him in a tight hug, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom and boundless heart of this remarkable child who had somehow become my greatest teacher. "And I'm proud of you," I whispered against his hair, "for being brave enough to speak your truth, for seeing people as they really are, not just as they present themselves, for understanding that success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the impact we have on others' lives." He hugged me back fiercely, then pulled away with the rapid mood shifts of pre-adolescence. "Can we order pizza? I'm starving." I laughed, grateful for his ability to ground me in the simple pleasures of everyday life. "Absolutely. Extra cheese?" "Obviously," he replied with the eye roll that was becoming his signature expression. As I reached for my phone to place the order, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Shoulders straight, expression open, stance confident. I looked like a woman who knew her worth, who didn't need external validation to recognize the value of her choices. I looked like someone who had finally stepped fully into her own story. All it had taken was one brave voice, my son's, to break through years of misunderstanding and dismissal. One moment of truth-telling to shift an entire family dynamic. One clear statement of fact to begin the process of healing wounds I had carried for too long. My mom's name is on the cover of Architectural Digest this month. Simple words that had changed everything. Not because they proclaimed my success to a skeptical audience, but because they had come from a place of such pure conviction, such unwavering belief in my worth, that they couldn't be dismissed or diminished. In that moment, I made a silent promise, to myself, to Elijah, and even to my newly receptive family, that I would never again shrink myself to make others comfortable. I would pursue my vision with the same courage my son had shown, speaking truth without apology, creating spaces and relationships built on authenticity rather than expectation. Because when we are truly seen by even one person who recognizes our essential worth, we find the strength to stand in our truth, to claim our space, to build a life that reflects our deepest values rather than others' limited perceptions. And nothing, not family pressure, not professional skepticism, not years of being underestimated, can diminish the power of being finally, fully seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.